This was the cover of a major Israeli newspaper in March 2019. The text beside this image mentions dozens of anti-Semitic events that took place in pretty much every corner of the world within a matter of days, altogether in a time span of about 3 weeks. And we're not talking about Jewish people who reported that they're being treated unfairly. These are desecrated cemeteries, swastikas and graffitis on Jewish sites and monuments, vandalism, and violence. So, how is it that in the 21st century, anti-Semitism isn't just resurging, but is actually spreading and intensifying globally? What is it about hatred of Jews that humanity just can't seem to shake off? In the next few minutes, you'll see how the wisdom of Kabbalah uncovers the answers to these questions and more, and why it's relevant to all of us, Jewish or not. See, throughout history, Jews have been hated for and blamed for pretty much anything and its opposite. They have been considered those responsible for the death of Jesus, but also those who invented Christianity. They were labeled warmongers, as well as cowards. They were hated by the communists for creating capitalism, but accused by capitalists for creating communism. They were hated for being arrogant, but also treated as an inferior race. When they donate money, they're ostentatious hypocrites, but most of the time they're greedy moneymakers. And they're blamed for being racists who seclude themselves from society, and at the same time, ruthless cosmopolitans who push for globalist agendas. So, somehow to this day, anti-Semitism manages to transcend geography, culture, religion, language. It even transcends politics. And it's much easier to spot anti-Semitism on the far right when people in Charlottesville chant, "Jews will not replace us," as they hold swastikas and torches. But anti-Semitism on the far left could be a lot more dangerous, because it can infiltrate the mainstream under the guise of criticism on the State of Israel. So, before you know it, anti-Semitic propaganda becomes normalized. Just a reminder, this is Belgium in 2019. This is Nazi Germany in 1936. So, why do people all over the world share this gut-level, irrational hatred that seems to be mutating throughout history like a virus that never goes away? Even if someone is doing some really good global incitement work, why is it working so well? Why does it catch on so easily? What if, beyond politics, religion, and culture, there is a reason for this? What if there is something happening in the human network between Jews and non-Jews, yet neither of them understands what that is? So let's start here. Humanity, beyond politics, religion, and culture, is a network. Let me show you what I mean. This is a network of fungi in a petri dish. This is a network of neurons in the human brain. This is a cosmic network of some 24,000 galaxies held together by gravity. Nature is full of networks from the micro to the macro. And so, humanity, too, is a network. This means that we're all interconnected and interdependent, and influences can travel and spread throughout the network. And this is where the authentic wisdom of Kabbalah steps in. See, there are many misconceptions and misinterpretations, but Kabbalists are actually people who research the deeper binding force of nature. And Kabbalah is the science of connection. It explains how human beings are inherently connected to each other and to nature, to the governing system of nature. So it explains the laws and the evolution of the human network. So, just like it happens with other organisms, Kabbalah explains that humanity is evolving to become a globally integrated kind of superorganism. See, essentially all of nature moves towards greater complexity and greater connection. And it happens layer by layer. So for example, think about how different atoms join to form molecules, and these molecules come together to macromolecules, such as DNA and other examples, and they become organelles, which are like minuscule tiny organs that have specific functions within the cell, which is the basic unit of life. And then many cells come together to create tissues, and different kinds of tissues come together to create organs. And the pattern repeats itself, and organs come together to create organ systems, and that creates an organism. So, more complexity, more connection, a higher level of being. You are a higher level of being made possible by some 50 trillion globally integrated cells. And so am I, and every one of us. And so, how does this happen in the case of humanity? So Kabbalah explains that nature has to create a mini model of global connection, which can then spread throughout the network. So how does this happen? Let me take you back some 4,000 years ago. This is ancient Mesopotamia. This is more or less today's Iraq, a little bit of Kuwait, a little bit of Syria, mostly Iraq though, and this is considered the cradle of human civilization. This land here between these two rivers had stable climate, rich soil, and steady supply of fresh water, all perfect for thriving agriculture. And so some of the world's first cities were created here. And innovations that have changed the face of humanity forever started here, like writing, like astronomy, law, mathematics. See, if you look at your watch now, why do you have 60 seconds within every minute that passes? It comes from there. How many hours do we have in a day? How many months in a year? All of these are infrastructures of human culture that we, thousands of years later, still use to this day, and they all started there. So this point here, Babylon, was probably the most successful city in the area, and that became the cultural center of humanity at the time. We're talking about a time when humanity is very small, quantitatively. There are between 1 to 30 million people, that's the estimation, in those times, and there are over 200,000 people in Babylon. So something else happened there in Babylon as well. Something that Kabbalah calls the growth of the human ego. Let me explain what I mean. If we go further back in time, in history, human beings were less evolved as individuals. They had more instinctive connection to each other and to nature. Now, as humans evolved, their sense of self has evolved, and they became more individualistic beings and a more complex society by consequence. And that's the process that Kabbalah refers to as the growth of the human ego. And so Kabbalah explains that Babylon, some 3,800 years ago, was the place and time when the ego reached a certain peak in its development. And that this is the true meaning of the story that some of us are familiar with, the Tower of Babel, that the people couldn't build because they stopped understanding each other, and then they ended up scattering across the globe. And among the Babylonians, however, there was one of the first Kabbalists that actually all of you have heard of. He saw that the rise that was happening of the human ego was a natural dynamic. He saw that it had to happen in order for human beings to consciously raise their level of connection. And so Abraham started a movement. He basically toured the area and asked around whether people were interested in rising consciously above the human ego to discover the binding force of nature. Now remember, this is Babylon. This was the cultural center of humanity at the time, which means that representatives from the various groups and tribes and clans were already there. And he gathers them to a movement of people who are wanting to work on unity above all differences. And that group was later called Yehudim, Jews. And that comes from the word yichud, which means unity. Here's a quote from Maimonides. He writes this 850 years ago. He writes that Abraham went from city to city, kingdom to kingdom, until thousands and tens of thousands joined, and they are the people of the house of Abraham. And they became a nation. So different individuals from different groups joining together to form something new. Sounds familiar? Sfat Emet, another Kabbalistic book, this is written about 150 years ago. Yehudi, Jewish, means Yechidi, one who clings to the point of life, which is where unity lies. And Noam Elimelech, another Kabbalist, writes this almost 300 years ago. Abraham planted the seed of love for all people of the world. So Kabbalists throughout the centuries knew the little-known birth story of the Jewish people, and they passed it down throughout the centuries from Kabbalist to Kabbalist. So remember, humanity is a network. So where are we now? We're at a moment in time where we have two groups. One of them is actually representatives of all of humanity that have managed to achieve the next degree of human connection, and the rest of humanity as well. And so nature created a mini model of global unity. So the moment the model was created in the system, the demand for the model to spread was embedded in the system as well. In other words, the moment that group was formed, a deep-seated demand from them to deliver what they had was embedded in the system. In other words, the creation of the Jewish people and the inherent sentiments towards them are two sides of the same coin. They're different opposite aspects of the same process. So, it's fascinating to compare what Kabbalists say versus what some anti-Semitic ideologues say. Take Henry Ford, for example. He was known for holding deep anti-Semitic views, and he writes this about 100 years ago. Society has a large claim against the Jew, that he sees his exclusiveness, and that he begin to fulfill, in a sense his exclusiveness has never yet enabled him to fulfill, the ancient prophecy that through him all the nations of the earth should be blessed. He also writes, modern reformers who are constructing model social systems would do well to look into the social system under which the early Jews were organized. Now here is what the preeminent Kabbalist of the 20th century, who wrote the commentary on the book of Zohar, which you may have heard of, also writes about 100 years ago. The Israeli nation had been established as a kind of a gateway by which the sparks of unity, of purity, will flow onto all of mankind across the world until they develop and come to understand the pleasantness and serenity of love of others. So, if nature created a model of global connection in the system, the question is now, how does it expand throughout the network? And the answer is that nature has to send that group to mingle with the rest of the network. And as it happens, the whole of humanity is also spreading physically across the globe. And so this process takes about 2,000 years, where the Jews lose their conscious connection with each other and they find themselves roaming the world. And guess what? Wherever they go, they're persecuted. Here is an incomplete list of Jewish expulsions, Jewish slavery, Jewish pogroms, and the like. And as you can notice, it's quite a small font. These are 2 columns, and this is 1, 2, 3 slides. It's a long list. Jews have been persecuted from Babylon to Rome to England to Mississippi. And the list goes on. But obviously the event that is the recent major one that we all remember is the Holocaust, which leaves a very unique and powerful imprint in the collective consciousness of mankind. Now, somehow, by way of nature, they managed to survive all of this and even establish the State of Israel some 70 years ago, which takes us back to the 21st century. Where are we now? The world has become a globally interconnected village. It's like a modern-day Babylon, if you will. And it's interesting to see that the risks that we're facing today, whether they are technological, social, political, economic, ecological, they're all interdependent across the globe, and they require some higher level of global cooperation to occur in the human network. And so we're in a very unique situation. Most Jews unconsciously carry a method for human connection. The world, on the other hand, shows growing anti-Semitism, which is an unconscious demand for that higher level of human connection to occur. And if Jews rekindle their inherent connection, then they can start a chain reaction of connection in the network. However, Kabbalah explains that today, just like in the times of Abraham, anyone can access the method of connection. It doesn't matter if you're African or American or European or Australian. You can be from Antarctica for that matter. And so, correspondingly, what's happening in the 21st century is that the integration process has been completed and people all over the world are gradually awakening to the consciousness and the idea that we are one collective entity. So to conclude, all of us are being pushed to discover that we're one body, that we are one family, if you will. We're pushed to rise to a conscious experience of our connection to each other and to nature itself. As Kabbalist Yehuda Ashlag Baal Sulam writes, it is certain and unequivocal that the purpose of creation lies on the shoulders of the whole human race, black, white, or yellow, without any difference whatsoever. You're welcome to post any questions you may have in the comments below.